Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose bright stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Oh, whoa, hello. That was, for those of you who have never heard her before, that is little 7-year-old Malia Emma, who, I wonder if she, Glenn, do you think she even understands the song that was?
Oh, yeah.
Holy smokes. Talk about belting it out.
It's amazing. Watch the video, everybody.
It is, yeah. Go on YouTube. Look for Malia Emma. She's done a couple of them, especially at some soccer games and stuff. You guys will love it. Welcome to Up with America. Welcome to Talk 94.5 WTKN. We appreciate you being here with us today. We have a kind of a packed full day with some callers and so forth. So I want to get right into it, if you don't mind. And one of the things that I've heard from the last 2 or 3 weeks is several callers, listeners have said that although they appreciated the fact that I read a list of those things that were featured in the Democratic platform, they would prefer if I listed what's in both platforms.
Yeah.
So,
we only really care about one.
yeah. So, that being the case, Glenn and I are going to have some fun with you today.
Mm-hmm.
He's forced me to have to read the Democratic stuff. He's going to read the Republican platform.
Woohoo.
And what we've done is divide it in half. I got some help from an organization that did this. And I will read one, and he will read the similar one that has to do with the same subject that's about Republicans. So without further ado, we will get started. The 2021 Democratic platform supports the government funding of abortions, cementing abortion on demand into law.
The Republican platform opposes abortion, affirming that an unborn child has a fundamental right to life, advocating for a ban on abortions after 20 weeks, prohibiting your tax dollars from paying for abortions, and supporting a human life constitutional amendment.
And the Democratic platform clearly says nothing about marriage and family being the very bedrock of our society.
But the Republican platform upholds the nuclear family as the foundation of society and defines marriage as between one man and one woman.
So then the Democratic platform rejects religious exceptions for business, medical providers, and social service agencies to follow their sincerely held beliefs.
But the Republican platform defines religious liberty broadly and condemns efforts to censor faith-based beliefs.
And at the same time, the Democratic platform supports legislation that would redefine religious liberty, altering our entire federal civil rights framework and allowing biological males to participate in female student sports.
But on the other hand, the Republicans' platform also affirms every American's right to be treated with dignity, but opposes an oppressive sexual ideology that includes ongoing attempts to harm the individual's rights of conscience.
There you go. So the Democratic platform opposes conscientious rights in healthcare, condemning the Trump administration for allowing doctors to practice medicine in accordance with their conscience.
The Republican platform, though, supports the conscious right of doctors, nurses, and pharmacists, as well as the rights of parents to determine the right treatment and therapies for their minor children.
Then the Democratic platform says nothing at all about God in government and refers only to God and our God-given potential.
The Republican platform enshrines our constitutional rights as God-given and inalienable. The entire platform mentions God 15 times.
And finally, and this one's kind of important, folks, because this is what we're going to be talking about. Regarding the Supreme Court, the Democratic platform vows to appoint justices who will enforce activist precedents such as Roe v. Wade, and now, based on the failure of both Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden and his running mate, Kamala Harris, have added a new and dangerous threat to the balance of power at the federal level, unwilling to say whether they will or will not pack the court.
The Republican platform, on the other hand, supports appointing justices who respect the rule of law expressed within the Constitution and seek to enable the courts to reverse activist decisions.
That sounds really good.
I like the Republican platform better than yours, Tom.
You do? You do?
Yeah.
You do? Well, I'll probably lose my seat here on the bench. Listen, we have a fantastic interview coming up, folks, with a caller who is the executive director of U.S. Term Limits. I am a huge term limits fan. I think Glenn is too, and I know Up With America has been promoting term limits for a long time. But it's time to get something done about it.
Right.
So we'll be right back in a couple minutes, and then when we do, what do we got?
Did you want Bernie?
Oh, I forgot about Bernie.
Yeah.
Good heavens, how could I forget
I
Bernie?
keep you on the tracks, brother.
Bernie, thank you.
When we'll go from Bernie right into commercial.
Okay, you got a deal. We're doing Bernie Sanders and his feelings about term limits.
This ought to be good.
Okay, I see a gentleman right here. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Oh, God, when people go to their cell phones, I get nervous. This question has been prepared several months in advance.
I'm not going to read anything. Thank you, Senator. My name is Ken Quinn.
Ken.
And one of the issues that the American people have wanted for decades, in fact, New Hampshire, along with 22 other states back in the 90s, passed state laws to put term limits on members of Congress to deal with the power that people get and desire once they spend too much time in Washington, D.C. Would you support a reform along with overturning Citizens United for campaign finance to allow rotation of office through term limits, an amendment to the Constitution for term limits for members of Congress?
I don't think so. Ken is your name?
Ken.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the issue is
He doesn't think so.
that if you have a vibrant democracy, and that means if you're not having billionaires buying elections, if you're not having governors like the governor of New Hampshire, among others, trying to suppress the vote, and then you have term limits because you could throw, if the incumbent doesn't have an outrageous advantage, if you want to run against me, and you have as much money to spend because we have public funding of elections, people want to vote for you, they want to vote for me. So I'm not a great fan of term limits. But I am a great fan of overturning Citizens United. I am a great fan of ending voter suppression, which is going on all over this country.
Amazing.
And I am a great fan of having public funding of elections. So if you want to run against me, you're going to run with the same amount of money as I have. All right?
All right,
And
thank
gotta
you,
shout
Bernie.
to me.
Listen, here's the problem, Bernie,
On the
my
other
buddy.
hand, if you like somebody who is...
Here's the problem, Bernie. We don't have public funding of elections, and we're never going to have public funding of elections. And he gets millions of dollars from individuals. So we're going to cut to a commercial, and we're going to hear how this really works. Thanks, everybody. Get right back to you. All right, welcome back to Up With America, everybody. Those of you who have either been around the show for a while or else who have followed Up With America, joined Up With America, or follow our website or Facebook pages, know that we have about a dozen smart solutions for America. And I can tell you at the top of that list, there are 3 or 4 smart solutions. Probably at the very top of the list is that we simply have to get term limits. I don't think the country survives without term limits. And I, of course, have been trying to do this from the bottom up, starting out with local city council or dog catcher, term limits for everybody. But we are honored today to have a special guest on that knows more about this probably than anybody in the country and is more well-spoken. I have seen him 2 or 3 times on television, and it's Nick Tomboulides. Did I say that right, Nick?
Yes, sir.
It's
great to be with you.
Welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're with us. This is such a hugely important thing. We've got so much crazy stuff going on in the country right now, but I still feel like if we can finally get this done, a lot of things can change. So with your permission, what I'd like to do is turn this over to you and have you tell us a little bit about yourself and then about how you got involved in this and why you think it's important and where we go from there. And then I'll have some questions.
Sure, yeah, happy to do so. And I'm actually looking forward to the upcoming Supreme Court hearings, because anytime the Congress gets together on national TV, it's basically a free commercial for term limits. So I'm very happy that that's going to be happening soon.
Amen to that.
Yeah, so I'm a political activist. I've been a political activist since college. There are many issues that were very, very important to me, but I think one of the big ones was the national debt. You know, you could probably tell by my last name that I am not Canadian. I am Greek. And, you know, what happened in Greece is that the government spent way more money than it was taking in. The country went bankrupt, and it was a very terrible situation. And I remember, you know, not 5-10 years ago, people were saying, here, we don't want to become Greece. You know, we don't want the national debt to spiral out of control. But unfortunately, it has. And several other issues have spiraled out of control as well. You know, we've got an immigration crisis. We've got a health care crisis. You know, we've got members of Congress who can't agree on anything. And they can't do what's right for the country because they're too focused on their own reelection. And so what I realized was, you know, in terms of Congress, as a political activist, it wasn't enough to just keep changing the ship captain over and over again or turning control over to a different party. You had to fix the structural problems that were wrong with Congress before you could tackle the national debt, before you could tackle all of these other very important issues. And so I became a term limits activist. I agree with you that nothing will save our country faster and better than getting rid of some of these career politicians who've been in Washington for 30, 40, in some cases 50 years.
Amen.
And are stopping the people from really having our voice heard because they've got their eyes fixated on the next election instead of doing what's right. And so, you know, I got involved with U.S. term limits. We're a national grassroots organization, and we're committed to a very simple idea, and that's restoring a citizen legislature. You know, if the situation in Washington over the last several decades has taught us anything, it's that professional politicians and professional government does not work. Professional politicians are a failed model of government. And the system we have now, it punishes people who show courage and show boldness. You know, they lose their clout in D.C. They may lose their seats. I think we need term limits to restore courage and bring people to Washington for the right reasons.
Well, first of all, thank you. I agree with everything you said, obviously. You made a comment one time, I think I saw this on TV maybe a year or two ago, where you were comparing for a Senate hearing or a House hearing what it would be like if you're an employer and you hired somebody that you thought was going to be great for this job, and now you have a new problem because they don't want to leave.
Right.
Tell that story real quick. You don't have to tell the whole thing, but I just love the way, because let me interrupt my own self and just say, I can't tell you how many people don't understand the whole concept of term limits. They think somehow we're trying to restrict people's service or whatever it is, but that's not it at all. So, yeah.
No, I think it comes down to, you know, the constitutional structure of our country. You know, Benjamin Franklin once said that for elected officials to leave office and become private citizens again, that is not to degrade them, but that is to promote them. Because in the eyes of the founding fathers, in the eyes of the people who built America, there's no title higher than citizen. I mean, this is a democratic republic. The people are the boss. The citizens are supposed to be in charge. And so the analogy I used when I was in Washington, D.C. is, you know, what if you had a business and you hired employees and they just weren't doing the job? They were slacking off. They were not showing up for work. They were focused more on keeping their jobs than actually doing their jobs. You'd be in every right mind to fire people like that. I mean, they would have been out on their butts with a pink slip, if this were a private enterprise. But in Washington, D.C., we sometimes lose sight of the fact that the people are the boss. The citizens are in charge here. And in a republic, the politicians, the public servants work for us and not the other way around. And so when 82% of Americans across the board, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, say that we want term limits, I think our so-called public servants have an obligation to listen to that.
Well, okay, so you can help me out a lot here, and you can help out of our listeners out a lot here, because here's the problem that I'm having. Like you, I was an activist. I'm not doing that quite as much as I used to. But I spent about 35 or 40 years being an activist, and then even 25 or 30 of those years as a political consultant. And the nonsense that you're fed when you ask somebody, or when somebody at a public meeting or some sort of an activity that has to do with your local or state or federal elected officials is there talking, and somebody brings up term limits, the answers are just bizarre. Well, we don't really, Tom, don't you understand? We have term limits every 2 years, every 4 years, every 6 years. All you have to do is just vote me out. But they don't seem to comprehend the fact, or they do comprehend it and don't want to, that the money problem alone is proof that incumbency is a tremendous thing to have. If you're an incumbent, in all likelihood, you've been raising money for the last 2, 4, or 6 years. You have a huge bank account, and whoever challenges you cannot possibly compete. That's a huge problem.
That's exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And if you look at the power of incumbency across the board, especially at the federal level, incumbents are getting $9 in checks from special interests, corporate PACs, unions, and so forth for every $1 that goes to a challenger.
Wow.
When you are an incumbent and you want to announce a new initiative, it's going to be the Saving Families and Children initiative sponsored by Congressman Jones. You're going to get free media coverage. You're going to be in every newspaper. You're going to have every TV channel on you. You're going to get all these opportunities afforded to you that no challenger has, and you're going to build up that public name recognition. You're going to get an advantage that anyone coming from the outside trying to challenge the establishment does not have. And we can say in a technical sense, sure, you can just vote people out, but the bottom line is the incumbents have stacked the deck. They have rigged the game, and they know it. When you look at somebody like Nancy Pelosi, she'll tell you we don't need term limits because you can just vote her out. But on the other hand, behind the scenes, she's sitting on $25, $30 million to make sure nobody has a chance, nobody has a prayer to ever come into that district and challenge her. And what we see is, as a result of that, good people just don't run. They don't run against incumbents because they know incumbents, despite having a 10% approval rating, they have a 95% reelection rate. Yeah. And so who in their right mind, unless you are a self-made millionaire or a billionaire, who's going to run for Congress against somebody that's going to win 95% of the time and has every advantage in the world? So good, well-meaning people who want to be in public service, they wait for an open seat. The problem is, as we know, sometimes those open seats don't come open for 30 or 40 years.
Right. Yeah,
so
decades.
The only way to really open the system up and give people more opportunities is through term limits. I tell people all the time, it's not term limits that would keep choices off your ballot. It's incumbency that keeps choices off your ballot now because people aren't willing to run. And that's what we see. 90% of the elections for Congress are either uncontested or undercontested, meaning that there's not a real serious challenger. You don't really have a real choice. At the state legislative level, about a third of all the elections in this country are one incumbent running unopposed because no one is willing to challenge them. So term limits would actually, believe it or not, term limits would give you more choices than ever before at the ballot box.
So for those of you who may have tuned in late, I am on the phone right now. We are listening to Nick Tomboulides, who is your title Executive Director of U.S. Term Limits?
Yes, Executive Director of U.S. Term Limits. We're a national nonprofit organization. Okay. We work on term limits every level from Congress down to dog catcher.
Fantastic. So you have found new friends in Up With America because it is at the top of our list. We want to know what we can do. And before we go there, I want to ask you another couple of questions, if you don't mind, Nick. The first one is, How does the Citizens United case affect any of this? And the reason I bring it up is that I have been a staunch conservative my whole life. I'm really more like a constitutionalist than a conservative even. And when that thing passed and all the conservatives jumped for joy thinking they had done this great thing, I was like shocked because I figured we were going to have this thing around our neck forever. And now I think we do. When the Supreme Court ruled that corporations are people and they can spend whatever they want anonymously, I mean, is that impacting the term limits effort at all?
I think it really cuts both ways.
Okay.
Because in a sense, we all recognize that there's a problem with the money in politics. There's no question that having these special interests by our politicians, that's having a corrosive effect on the system. You look at reports coming from Washington, D.C., and what you're told is these members of Congress are not doing their jobs. They're spending 5 hours a day on the phone. They're like national telemarketers begging for money for their next reelection. They're not reading the bills. They're not really focused. So I think there's a big problem of having Congress be captured by special interests. But on the other hand, when you have campaign finance rules, like the McConnell campaign finance rule, like McCain-Feingold, these rules are written by incumbents. So
True.
those rules are also written to help incumbents. I don't think Citizens United has had a dramatic impact either way on the issue of term limits. But I will tell you that in terms of campaign finance reform, term limits may be the best thing that you can do, because by opening up seats, it lowers the barrier to entry for people who want to run for office. You don't need necessarily $2 or $3 million to run for office when the seat is open, like you would need if you were challenging an incumbent such as Nancy Pelosi or Steny Hoyer or Chuck Grassley.
Okay, that's absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think term limits is the ultimate campaign finance reform.
Okay, so next question. We have a lot of people, in fact, even just in the last year or two, who have completely freaked out about the convention of states. They're scared to death that if we have a convention of states, that these a bunch of hillbillies are going to get in a room someplace in Nashville and vote to get rid of guns and do this and do that. I mean, clear the air a little bit if you can on convention of states. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't U.S. term limits have a part of what you're working on is a convention like that?
That's right.
What is it, Article 5 convention?
That's right. If you go back to 1787 in Philadelphia, when the Constitution was written, and you read the notes from James Madison, you try to figure out what were these guys thinking at the time. There was a debate over how best to amend the Constitution. And at the very start of that debate, there was a consensus in Philadelphia that Congress should be the only body capable of proposing amendments. But then a few people spoke up, and one of them was George Mason, another one was a guy named Charles Pinckney. And they spoke up and they said, well, wait a minute. If you give Congress all the power over constitutional amendments, what are you going to do if Congress abuses its power? What are you going to do if you need an amendment like term limits to rein in the power of Congress and you have no one to propose it because there's a conflict of interest? And so the Article 5 convention was then born. You know, back in the founding era, they would have conventions all the time for different reasons. Mm-hmm. They would have them to deal with relations with the tribes. They would have them to deal with, price inflation, all sorts of things. And what a convention was in the founding era was it was a task force that was designed to solve a specific problem. And you would send experts, you would appoint experts to the task force, it was publicly accountable, and then it would recommend a solution. And so they gave us the amendment proposing convention in Article 5 that we could use if Congress ever abuses its power. It's supposed to be the safety valve in the Constitution. Because as you know, chickens don't tend to vote for Colonel Sanders, and members of Congress don't tend to vote for term limits.
That's true.
And so what we are suggesting, we are proposing is a term limits convention, not a convention that's talking about, everything under the sun, but a single issue term limits convention. We've got memos from Ed Meese, Ronald Reagan's Attorney General, that says absolutely a convention can be limited. Antonin Scalia has said the very same thing. We're asking 34 state legislatures to pass resolutions that say we want a constitutional amendment for congressional term limits. The state legislators, elected leaders, would then appoint delegates to the convention. They would write a term limits amendment, and then it would come back to the states where it would need 38 states to sign off to be ratified. I think that's a very safe process. I think if James Madison and Ben Franklin and George Washington were around today and we were complaining to them about how much we hate our Congress and our federal government, they would be asking, how come you haven't used the tool we gave you? The Article 5 convention is supposed to be that tool.
Well, thank you. That was exactly what I was looking for, because I've been promoting this. And there are people who are just so afraid of, like, we're going to lose the Second Amendment, we're going to lose this. So, and I'm glad that you guys are doing that. Let me. We're probably going to have to wrap it.
Can I say one more? Can I say one more thing?
Sure, I want you to, please.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to break it to everybody here, but there is a runaway convention that can propose anything it wants, and it is completely out of control with no inhibitions, and that is called the United States Congress. We need a convention of states in order to rein in the power of Congress. We need to keep it to a limited convention to limit their power.
Okay, so we're going to start promoting that heavily. I have a one question and then one request. The question is this. I understand yesterday or the day before, or maybe sometime earlier this week, Senator Pat Toomey, and was it former governor of Pennsylvania or something, have proposed term limits? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yes. In the Philadelphia Inquirer, you have Pat Toomey, a current U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania who's a Republican, and then former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell, who's a Democrat.
Right.
They teamed up, and they said, look, people think Democrats and Republicans are at each other's throats, but we're here to tell you there's one issue every American agrees on, and that's congressional term limits. Let's get it done. And not only did they say let's get it done, but they said let's do it with a single-issue term limits convention as well, called by the states.
Awesome. Okay. Final question, final request. Up with America, you're going to be learning a lot more about it because it's been around for a couple of years, but we're just now really getting fired up. We are all about term limits, and I want to make sure, and I'll be talking to the web guys here later today and this weekend, that we focus heavily on that, connect to you guys with your website, make sure we promote things that you're doing. If you were us, if you were a grassroots organization, it's a national organization, and it's spreading rapidly at this point, what would you ask us to do to help you the most to get this accomplished? What steps should we take?
I think there's nothing more important to get this done than talking to your state legislators.
Okay.
Members of Congress, like we've said, turkeys are not going to vote for Thanksgiving.
Yep.
I went to Congress. I testified in front of the United States Senate. I delivered a message from the American people. And you know what we got out of that? We got nothing. We didn't get a vote. That Senate Judiciary Committee did not even hold a vote on congressional term limits. If this is going to happen, it's going to come from the bottom up.
Okay.
It's going to be folks in the states. It's going to be state legislators calling for the term limits convention. So I would recommend talking to your state reps, your state senators, getting them on board. We have a pledge, actually. We like to hold politicians' feet to the fire. We never take their promises at face value. If you go to termlimits.com, you could download our term limits convention pledge.
Okay.
We ask every candidate in America for the state legislature to sign that pledge and say, I will be a co-sponsor for the term limits convention. I will vote for the term limits convention. That way we can hold their feet to the fire and get this done in a very short order.
Nick, by the way, Glenn, you're going to love this. We actually started, I must have been listening to him before I even knew him, because a couple of years ago we reevaluated our whole thing and started actually at the town level. So we have several towns and cities in South Carolina here who we are working to get them to establish term limits for city council and for dog catcher. I mean, literally.
Right.
So it seems like we're on the right track. Nick, this has been a true pleasure and an educational experience. Got a question for you. Do you play golf?
I don't actually. No, I can't
Never
get the ball
mind.
straight. I tried.
What do you like the beach? You live in Florida, right?
I live in Florida. I do like the beach. Yeah, I live right near Cocoa Beach.
Okay.
Okay.
The
Not
reason I'm
far
asking
from,
is
Kennedy Space Center.
Myrtle Beach is a weird place for Up With America to have started, but that's basically because I came out of the Washington area and have been here about 25 years. But don't be surprised if I call you soon and invite you here for some sort of a function when this COVID thing ends. I would love to have you be a featured speaker and really get into this with us. That would be awesome.
I would love to do it. Let's build the movement.
Okay.
The politicians, they're never going to do this on their own.
No,
we
they're
need
not.
to build up the grassroots. We need to pressure them to do the right thing and make our voices heard. So thank you for everything that you guys are doing with us.
Nick
America. I really
Tomboulides from the
appreciate it.
U.S. Term Limits, thank you for being with us today, and I will be in touch soon.
All right, Tom. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Wow, that was a great interview, Tom. Nice guy.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, what happened, I guess, Glenn, is that, of course, this has been on my heart and on my mind for a long, long time. And about maybe a year ago, I happened to catch him at that hearing he was talking about. Mm-hmm. And he made so much sense. So I've been thinking about this ever since we started the show. So we finally got it on.
He does make a lot of sense, and I'm rooting for him because I've been saying term limits for a long time.
Thank you, Glenn. Listen, we'll be back with more Up With America here on Talk 94.
Amazing grace.
All of us here at Up With America Radio on Talk 94.5 hope you have a fantastic day today. And some of you probably will think this is a very inappropriate song considering what's going on in America, but we kind of felt it was really important and really appropriate. This is 50 different singers in 50 different languages all around the world singing in one of those virtual choirs. Let's just listen for a minute or two. Anytime, isn't it? That's
I agree.
about, that's just very cool. So, take a break.
Yeah, let's come back and finish up with a long
All
segment.
right. That sounds great, my friend.
Thank you,
I'll
buddy.
see you all in just a few.
I like this. Very touching. Disney couldn't do as well.
Back home now, I know you're probably sleeping.
Good stuff.
This is one of the things I love about country music, especially, is there are so many wonderful songs that are patriotic tunes.
Oh, yeah.
This is one that I had never heard. I'm actually thinking about putting a show in the can that's basically all music,
Oh,
so that if I go swimming or sailing or golfing one day, everybody gets to hear the great stuff.
well, I used to do the top 25 country countdown.
Well,
so-
now we're cooking, folks. There we go. Welcome back to Up With America, Talk 94.5 WTKN. Thank you for joining with us today. So we're going to have a little fun here at the end of the day. Look, first of all, Glenn and I and a lot of other people, a whole lot of people I associate with, are pretty unhappy about what's going on with the Supreme Court and the potential that if things go differently, we don't know what's going to happen on November 3rd. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's going to be April 3rd because it's going to probably take months to cut through all this vote counting stuff.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is it would appear that that Joe Biden and his running mate are in favor of packing the court.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Folks, let me just say this. The only difference between this republic and other republics and democracies around the history of the world is the Supreme Court. That was what's different. There are other countries that have branches, multiple branches of government, a legislative branch, an executive branch. Nobody has a Supreme Court. If you put 5 more judges in of one party on purpose because it's a partisan thing, it destroys it. So let's listen to what probably one of the greatest justices of all time had to say about America himself. This is Antonin Scalia. Listen up, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm happy to be back in front of the Judiciary Committee where I started this pilgrimage. I am going to get even more fundamental than my good friend and colleague. Like him, I speak to to students, especially law students, but also college students and even high school students, quite frequently about the Constitution, because I feel that we're not teaching it very well. I speak to law students from the best law schools, people presumably especially interested in the law, and I ask them, how many of you have read the Federalist Papers? And well, a lot of hands will go out. No, not just number 48 and the big ones. How many of you have read the Federalist Papers, cover to cover? Never more than about 5%. And that is very sad. I mean, especially if you're interested in the Constitution. Here's a document that says what the framers of it thought they were doing. It's such a profound exposition of political science that it is studied in political science courses in Europe. And yet we have raised a generation of Americans who are not familiar with it. So when I speak to these groups, the first point I make, and I think it's even a little more fundamental than the one that Stephen has just put forward, I ask them, what do you think is the reason that America is such a free country? What is it in our Constitution that makes us what we are? And I guarantee you that the response I will get, and you will get this from almost any American, including the woman that he was talking to at the supermarket, the answer would be freedom of speech, freedom of the press, no unreasonable searches and seizures, no quartering of troops in hope, those marvelous provisions of the Bill of Rights. But then I tell them, if you think that a Bill of Rights is what sets us apart, you're crazy. Every banana republic in the world has a Bill of Rights. Every president for life has a Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights of the former evil empire, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was much better than ours. I mean it literally. It was much better. We guarantee freedom of speech and of the press. Big deal. They guaranteed freedom of the speech, of the press, of street demonstrations and protests, and anyone who is caught trying to suppress criticism of the government will be called to account. Whoa, that is wonderful stuff. Of course, just words on paper. What our framers would have called a parchment guarantee. And the reason is that the real constitution of the Soviet Union, you think of the word constitution, it doesn't mean a bill, it means structure. Say a person has a constitution, it's a sound structure. The real constitution of the Soviet Union, which is what our framers debated that whole summer in Philadelphia in 1787. They didn't talk about the Bill of Rights. That was an afterthought, wasn't it? That constitution of the Soviet Union did not prevent the centralization of power in one person or in one party. And when that happens, the game is over. The Bill of Rights is just what our framers would call a parchment guarantee. So the real key to the distinctiveness of America is the structure of our government. One part of it, of course, is the independence of the judiciary. But there's a lot more. There are very few countries in the world, for example, that have a bicameral legislature. Oh, England has a House of Lords for the time being, but the House of Lords has no substantial power. They can just make the Commons pass a bill a second time. France has a Senate, it's honorific. Italy has a Senate, it's honorific. Very few countries have two separate bodies in the legislature equally powerful. That's a lot of trouble, as you gentlemen doubtless know, to get the same language through two different bodies elected in a different fashion. Very few countries in the world have a separately elected chief executive. Sometimes I go to Europe to talk about separation of powers. And when I get there, I find that all I'm talking about is independence of the judiciary. Because the Europeans don't even try to divide the two political powers, the two political branches, the legislature and the chief executive. In all of the parliamentary countries, the chief executive is the creature of the legislature. There's never any disagreement between them and the prime minister, as there is sometimes between you and the president. When there's a disagreement, they just kick him out. They have a no confidence vote, a new election, and they get a prime minister who agrees with the legislature. And, the Europeans look at this system and they say, well, it passes one house, it doesn't pass the other house. Sometimes the other house is in the control of a different party. It passes both, and then this president who has a veto power vetoes it, and they look at this and they say, it is gridlock. And I hear Americans saying this nowadays, and there's a lot of it going around. They talk about a dysfunctional government because there's disagreement, and the framers would have said, yes, that's exactly the way we set it up. We wanted this to be power, contradicting power, because the main ill that beset us, as Hamilton said in the Federalist, when he talked about a separate Senate, he said, yes, it seems inconvenient, but inasmuch as the main ill that besets us is an excess of legislation, it won't be so bad. This is 1787. He didn't know what an excess of legislation was. So unless Americans can appreciate that and learn to love the separation of powers, which means learning to love the gridlock, which the framers believed would be the main protection of minorities, the main protection. If a bill is about to pass that really comes down hard on some minority, they think it's terribly unfair. It doesn't take much to throw a monkey wrench into this complex system. So Americans should appreciate that, and they should learn to love the gridlock.
Well, there he is, the late, great Antonin Scalia. May we all pray that Amy Coney Barrett is half as good as he was. The guy was a genius, and he guided this country for a long time. Now, we've been pretty heavy all day. We've talked about term limits. We've talked about what's coming up with the Supreme Court. We thought we'd let you go home today on a lighter note. And so this was from, I believe, 1965. And this is a very important Supreme Court case, so listen carefully.
The story you're about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
This is the city. Los Angeles, California. Some people rob for pleasure. Some rob because it's there. You never know. My name's Friday. I'm a cop. I was working the day watch out of robbery when I got a call from the Acme School Bell Company. There'd been a robbery. There's been a robbery. Yes, sir? What was it? My clappers. Your clappers? Yeah, you know those things inside a bell that makes them clang? The clangers. That's right, we call them clappers in the business. A clapper caper. What's that? Nothing, sir. Now, can I have the facts? What kind of clappers were stolen on this caper? They were copper clappers. And where were they kept? In the closet. Uh-huh. You have any ideas who might have taken the copper clappers from the closet? Well, just one. I fired a man. He swore he'd get even. What was his name? Claude Cooper. You think he... That's right. I think Claude Cooper copped my copper clappers. Kept in the closet. You know where this Claude Cooper is from? Yeah. Cleveland. That figures. That figures. What makes it worse, they were clean. Clean copper clappers. That's right. Why do you think Cleveland's Claude Cooper would cop your clean copper clappers kept in your closet?
All right, guys. Hey, listen, have a fantastic day and a fantastic week. Say a few prayers for America. We're going to need them. And study those platforms by the two parties, okay, so you know who you're voting for. Thanks for being with us today. Up with America, everybody.